There are destinies that intersect when everything seems to be falling apart. And so it was that, under the scorching Arizona sun, a woman in a simple dress and sad eyes stepped off a train, clutching a crumpled ticket and a heart full of hope. A hope that within minutes would be crushed by harsh reality. At the small, dusty Silver Rock station, no one was waiting for her. No anxious gaze, no smile, no saddled horse to take her to her promised new home. It was as if her name, written in so many passionate letters, had been swept away by the dry desert wind. And there, amid suitcases and curious glances, she understood. She had been abandoned, once again. But destiny has its own paths. And sometimes those who arrive alone don't stay alone for long. On the other side of the platform, leaning against an aged wooden fence, a man in a wide hat watched everything silently. His eyes held secrets, pain, and a shy hope. He didn't move immediately, but something in him knew. That woman, lost and wounded, wasn't a coincidence. She was a calling. It was the beginning of something he could no longer postpone. What she didn't know was that this man, a cowboy marked by the past, had a secret that would change the course of her life. And that, deep down, he had been waiting for her long before that train arrived. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. Get ready, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a dating story. It's a story of redemption, of secrets, of broken promises, and of unexpected new beginnings. The Wild West was a place of tough men and forgotten women. But it was also a stage where broken hearts found, by chance or fate, the chance to love again. Let's go together to Chapter 1. Before she set foot in Silver Rock, that woman had a name and a dream: Abigail Turner. The daughter of a poor Ohio carpenter, she grew up among splinters of wood and the smell of sawdust. Watching her father spend his final years trying to support a daughter the world seemed to want. Old Turner's death left Abigail with only two options: languish in a town that offered nothing but misery, or answer a newspaper ad promising love, land, and a new beginning with a man waiting for her in the far west. She chose hope, because to those who have nothing, even a lie can seem like a promising future. The man who had promised her love was named Albert Green, a farmer who, in letters, described a dignified life, a simple but honest home, and the desire for a woman with whom to share days and nights under the starry desert sky. The letters were filled with sweet words, promises of respect and protection. Abigail, alone in the world, clung to those lines as if they were ropes thrown to a shipwrecked person. She sewed a new dress, saved every penny she could, and boarded the train without looking back. Her heart was pounding, but hope, that was what gave her breath. As the train crossed the country, Abigail daydreamed. She imagined home, the smell of the ranch wood, the touch of Albert's hands, the sound of the wind between the mountains. Each station was a step closer to what she believed to be her destination. She reread each letter so many times that she knew every word by heart. And even when the fear whispered in her ears that it might be a mistake, she clung to the faith that there were still men of their word in the world. After all, who would write so many promises only to abandon a woman in the middle of nowhere? But what she didn't know is that often words on paper can't withstand the weight of real life. And Silver Rock didn't welcome her with flowers, but with the suspicious gaze of residents who'd seen too many promises broken in those parts. There, in the merciless heat and the dust that got into her clothes, Abigail discovered the bitter taste of disappointment. No one was waiting for her, no Albert Green, no sign of a future, only emptiness. And a gaze watching her from afar, a gaze that carried an ancient secret and a redemption yet to come. Abigail's journey was long and lonely, marked by the constant creak of the train's wheels on the tracks and the smell of smoke wafting through the open windows. At each stop, the scenery changed, but the feeling of being further and further away from everything she knew only grew. Through the windows, she watched the green plains give way to the aridity of the desert, the dry mountains, and the endless horizons. Beside her, passengers came and went, but no one stayed long enough to hear her story. Abigail held the letters in her lap, carefully folded, as if the paper could protect her from the unknown. Each word written by Albert Green was a silent promise that on the other side of those railroad tracks there would be an embrace waiting for her. And that was what kept her going, even when longing for the simple life in Ohio tightened her chest. She remembered her father, the afternoons spent helping in the carpentry shop, the smell of cut wood and varnish. She remembered the cold nights when they would warm themselves by the wood stove, sharing pieces of bread and old stories. Now there was no one to share the hard bench of the train, no one to hold her hand when fear hit hard. Every jolt of the train was a reminder that she could no longer go back, that everything she knew was behind her. Still, her heart beat faster, not just with fear, but with an insistent hope. "It's just a little longer," she repeated to herself. "Soon he'll be waiting for me at the station." And that phrase echoed like a mantra, a prayer against abandonment. The train moved forward, passing through small towns that passed like mirages through the dusty windows. At each stop, Abigail smoothed her dress, fixed her hair, and gazed anxiously out the window, hoping to see a familiar face, someone who would extend a hand and say, "You're here, Abigail." But no one came. The men who got on and off were rough, mine and farm workers, their gazes weighing down on her like stones. The women, few in number, remained distant, with curious glances, but without offering a word of comfort. The journey seemed endless, a crossing between what was and what could be. But each kilometer traveled was also another weight on her shoulders. When the engineer finally shouted, "Silver Rock," Abigail's heart nearly leaped from her chest. She straightened her dress, tucked the letters close to her chest, and stepped off the train with shaky but determined steps. The station was small, shrouded in dust and heat, with half a dozen people watching the train's arrival as if it were the only event of the day. She searched the faces, her anxious gaze searching for a man wearing a hat, perhaps holding a flower, a scarf, any sign. But what she found was emptiness, and the curious and perhaps pitying looks of some locals who murmured among themselves as if they already knew what was happening. There, under the relentless sun, Abigail realized she had perhaps made the biggest mistake of her life. Gradually, the station's sounds faded. The train departed, taking with it passengers, luggage, and the last breath of movement the place had known. Abigail remained behind, surrounded by the sound of the wind whipping up dust in small eddies, as if the ground itself wanted to swallow her. The dress, which had once represented a new beginning, now felt like a heavy burden, a reminder of the deception she believed to be love. The people remaining at the station said nothing, just looked at her with the kind of pity that hurts more than once. She tried asking for Albert Green, but no one knew of a man by that name. An old man selling train tickets scratched his head and said he'd never heard of anyone waiting for a bride in those parts. The ground gave way beneath her feet. Abigail sat on the wooden bench, the same one where so many travelers had rested their bodies and their dreams. I stared at the horizon, but saw nothing but dust and despair. The heat was beginning to take its toll. Sweat dripped down my back and my stomach growled. She didn't know where to go. She had no money to return, no home to return to. The letters that had promised her a future now seemed like useless scraps of paper, lies printed in faded ink. The feeling of abandonment was so profound she could barely breathe. Why would he do this, she thought. Why call me if you didn't want me to come? Those questions repeated like a drum in her chest, each beat more painful than the last. And it was in that moment, in that void between hope and despair, that she saw him. A man leaning against a nearby fence, his hat tilted forward, his face partially hidden by shadow. He had been watching her since she stepped off the train, but he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Something about that look was different. It wasn't pity, nor simple curiosity. It was as if he knew her, as if he had been waiting. Abigail looked away, uneasy, but she couldn't ignore his presence. There was something about that man, a mystery, a weight, a secret that seemed to pull her even against her will. The sun continued to beat down, and she wondered how much longer she would have before she passed out from exhaustion or hunger. That was when he finally moved. The cowboy walked toward her with slow but sure steps, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. When he stopped in front of her, he removed his hat and revealed a face marked by the sun, hard life, and mistakes. He looked her in the eye and, in a hoarse, firm voice, said, "You haven't been abandoned, young lady. I've been waiting for you." Abigail frowned, confused, unsure of who this man was or why he was saying this. Her heart beat faster, torn between fear and hope. All she could ask was, "Who are you?" The man introduced himself with a name Abigail had never heard before, Elias Boone. His voice was deep, slurred with the accent of the dry western lands, and each word seemed to carry more weight than the heat that hung over the station. He knelt slowly before her, as if unwilling to frighten her, and said, "I know you came for Albert Green, but Albert is no more. I came in his place." The enigmatic words confused Abigail, who shrank back into the seat, her suspicious gaze mingled with the pain of having been deceived. Elias, seeing the fear in her eyes, lowered his head and continued, "Before you hate me, let me explain. I needed you to come, because in a way, I'm running away too. And maybe you're the only one who can understand." She wanted to run, she wanted to scream, she wanted to send him away. But there was something about that man that wasn't a threat. It was sadness, a sadness so thick it seemed to wrap around him like an invisible cloak. Elias's face was a map of scars, of days of struggle, of sleepless nights. And his eyes, oh, his eyes, they were a deep blue, but veiled by a guilt that not even time seemed able to erase. Abigail, still clutching her letters tightly, demanded to know the truth. Who was he? Why pretend to be Albert Green? Why take her across the country to encounter a lie? Elias sighed deeply, took a piece of leather from his pocket, and held it out to her. Inside was an old yellowed photo of a smiling man. "This was Albert, my brother, but he died before he wrote you the first letter." Abigail felt her world spin. The letters, the promises. Was it all false? She stared at Elias, trying to understand if it was a cruel game or a truth too bitter to be told any other way. The cowboy seemed to carry the weight of the confession, and then he added, "I wrote each letter, Abigail, because I knew you came from a place of pain, because I needed someone, anyone, to get me out of here. I'm a fugitive, not from the law, but from myself. And when I read your mail-order bride ad, I saw a chance for redemption. I saw a chance for a home again." The words landed like a punch to the young woman's stomach. Yet, beneath the anger, there was something stronger, curiosity, for this man who seemed as broken as she was. The silence between them weighed like the heat that hung over Silver Rock. Abigail, confused, tried to piece together that twisted story, and yet there was something about Elias that wouldn't let her go. Something in his gaze told her that, despite everything, he wasn't a common liar. He was someone who, like her, was searching for a place to exist. And there at the station, she realized her life was taking a turn she could never have predicted. The question now wasn't who Elias Boone was. The question was, why did he need her so much? Abigail could no longer bear the weight of doubt. She needed to know who this man really was. She needed to understand why a stranger would decide to lure her with fake letters to such a distant place. Elias, as if hearing the silent cry of her heart, sat beside her, took off his hat, and stared at the dusty floor of the station. Then he began to tell his story, not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as someone who had nothing left to lose. He said he was born right there, in Silver Rock, and grew up learning that the world had no mercy for the weak. From a young age, he learned to live in the shadow of his brother Albert, the good, honest man, loved by all, while Elias was a collection of mistakes, fights, escapes, bad choices. Years before, a devastating fire destroyed part of the city, and many blamed Elias, though he always professed his innocence. But his reputation as a troublemaker, a drunkard, a man of no word weighed too heavily for anyone to believe him. One by one, everyone he loved drifted away. Albert tried to defend him, tried to help him start over, but the city had already reached its verdict. Elias was condemned without trial. And when his own brother died in an accident amid the flames, the weight of guilt fell squarely on Elias's shoulders. He fled far away, but the past haunted him at every turn. It was during his travels that he found an old newspaper with mail-order bride ads. When he read Abigail's, something in him stirred, perhaps a last breath of hope. He decided to write as if he were Albert, creating a story of love, of promise, of a new beginning. Not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he wanted a chance to return, even if it was through a lie. I thought that if you came and saw this place, maybe you could see me in a way no one else does, Elias confessed, his eyes welling up for the first time. Abigail listened in silence, her chest tight, her heart torn between anger and compassion. The young woman took a deep breath. She was standing before a broken man, yes, but one who somehow still had the courage to bear himself before her. There was no malice in Elias, but desperation. She knew well what it was like to want a new beginning at any cost. She herself had boarded that train because of a promise written on paper, a promise she knew could be a lie. And now she was here, facing a lie that, paradoxically, seemed truer than anything she had ever experienced. Abigail stood slowly, her gaze steady, and said, "I don't know who you really are, Elias Boone, but if I'm here, I want to find out." Abigail's decision wasn't simple. Fear still lingered within her, but there was a spark of courage she hadn't known she possessed. She faced Elias Boone, that man marked by the past, and decided to follow him to the distant ranch where he lived, a place forgotten by the world, like its owner. The journey was long, on an old, silent horse, the hot desert wind biting their faces and the smell of dry earth permeating their clothes. Neither of them said much, but each step of the horse seemed to echo a mutual understanding. They were both survivors. When they arrived, what Abigail saw wasn't a home, but a shadow of a home. The house was simple, made of worn wood, surrounded by broken fences and dying pasture. But there was, somehow, an invitation to begin again. Elias showed her the house, as if presenting the ruins of what was once a dream. There were old portraits on the walls, a forgotten blanket on the sofa, traces of a family that no longer existed. "This was Albert's place," he said in a heavy voice, "but everything died with him, and with what little hope I had left." Abigail walked through the space with careful steps, touching objects as if she could hear echoes of a past that wasn't hers. The weight of the silence was immense, but she sensed that there might be a seed buried beneath so much pain. At one point, before Albert's portrait, Abigail asked, "And what do you want me to do here, Elias?" He lowered his head, defeated, and replied, "I want you to see me, that's all, before the world buries me for good." That night, the ranch was plunged into a deep darkness, broken only by the faint light of a lantern. Abigail didn't sleep. She sat in the rocking chair, listening to the sound of the wind outside and Elias's footsteps padding restlessly across the wooden floor. There was something in him that was still a boy, lost, waiting for someone to tell him he was valuable. And Abigail knew all too well what it was like to grow up without anyone telling us we matter. For the first time, she saw Elias without his rough cowboy mask. He was just a man afraid of being forgotten. The next day, Silver Rock learned that Elias Boone had returned to town, accompanied by an unknown woman. The looks were not kind. Whispers swirled around every corner. What's he back for? Does she know who she's dealing with? Elias was undaunted, but with each step through the dusty streets, the weight of distrust hunched his shoulders a little more. Abigail, at his side, kept her chin high. "I'm here by choice," he thought, "and no one's going to tell me who he is without me finding out for myself." And in that steady gaze, Elias found something he hadn't seen in a long time, someone willing to fight for him, even if it was just with their presence. The ranch, once left to the elements and solitude, began to change with Abigail's arrival. She woke early, braved the heat, dust, and fear, and began fixing what was broken. She fixed what she knew, cleaned what she could, and little by little the house ceased to be a mausoleum and became a home. Elias watched from afar, unsure how to thank her. He tried to help, but her rough manner and insecurity made him stumble over even the simplest things. Even so, her every gesture was a silent invitation for him to become a man again, not just a figure. The mornings took on the scent of coffee, and the sound of water washing the floor replaced the creaking of heavy silences. One afternoon, while they were mending the pasture fence, Abigail asked bluntly, "What do you expect of me, Elijah?" He lowered his head, took a deep breath, and said, "I hope you stay, but I understand if you want to leave." His words weren't a request, but a confession of fear. She stopped, looked at the horizon where the sun was falling like a fire in the sky, and replied, "I came to be the wife of someone who never existed, but I found a real man, and perhaps in time I can choose you." It was the first time a smile, a shy one, appeared on Elijah's lips. A smile that said, "Perhaps I still have salvation." The following days were filled with hard work, but also with silent complicity. Elias began to open up, telling stories about his childhood, the mistakes he'd made, and the longing he felt for his brother. Abigail listened without judgment, only with the patience of someone who understands that the past cannot be erased, but can be rewritten. And little by little the ranch flourished. The plants grew again, the animals began to fill the fields, and the smell of life replaced that of abandonment. Elias and Abigail didn't speak of love, but every look, every discreet touch was an unspoken promise. One day, while cleaning out the old barn, Elias found a piece of wood engraved with the name Green, the name of the brother he had loved so much. He stood there, staring at the letters, and Abigail approached. "You carry it with you, Elias. You don't have to run from it." And then he cried, for the first time in front of her. He cried because he understood that the past no longer needed to be a chain, but a foundation. And in that cry, Abigail embraced him, not as one comforting a lost man, but as one finally finding a home. The months passed like a steady wind blowing through the desert, and over time, that forgotten ranch in the middle of Arizona became a true home. Abigail and Elias built, side by side, a simple yet meaningful routine. There were no grand declarations of love, but there was the knowing look at sunrise, the silent care when one fell ill, the brief touch that said, "I'm here." The house gained color, the pasture grew green again, and the heavy silence gave way to the sound of life pulsing in every corner. Silver Rock remained suspicious, but little by little, even the most skeptical began to see that Elias Boone was no longer the same man who had fled years before. The most important thing wasn't what they gained in land or possessions, but what they rebuilt within themselves. Abigail discovered that behind every lie lay a man desperate for redemption. And Elias, in turn, found in her the chance to restart not only his life, but his very vision of himself. The ranch became a symbol of resilience, a place where two broken hearts learned to heal with each other. The photo of Elias's brother took pride of place in the living room, next to a new portrait of them, together, with the serene eyes of someone who finally had a home. On full moon nights, sitting on the porch, Elias liked to say, "I wrote you letters full of lies, Abigail, but what I feel now, I never needed to write that." She would smile, her eyes welling with tears, and reply, "I read the truth in your eyes long before you said anything." And it was true. Because some truths don't need paper nor formal promises. They are in actions, in small gestures, in the daily decision to stay. And in that desert, they learned that love doesn't come ready-made. It is cultivated, like dry land that one day blooms with the right care. Thus, Boone Ranch was no longer just a barren wasteland, but a place of encounters and real promises. Passers-by saw a couple who didn't need rings to prove their feelings, because their love was in the land that flourished, in the animals that returned to the pasture, in the smell of fresh coffee every morning, and above all, in the silent embrace that said, "I've been waiting for you all my life." This story, my friend, isn't just about a jilted bride or a runaway cowboy. It's about me, about you, about everyone who's ever felt cheated by life, by promises unfulfilled, by letters never answered. It's about the courage to stay, even when everything tells you to leave. It's about the power of starting over, about forgiveness, about the chance to discover that behind every mistake, there's a heart longing to be seen, to be loved, to be forgiven. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share this video. Maybe someone somewhere needs to hear that there's always a second chance. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, full of soul, emotion, and hope. Share on WhatsApp, social media, wherever you can. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. I really want to read each one and see how far this story has come. And of course, keep watching the next videos, because each story we tell here is a blanket to warm, weary hearts, a beacon for those lost in the desert of life. Thank you so much for being with me this far. May this story live on in you as a reminder that sometimes love comes not as we expect, but as we need it. Until the next video,